How much does a medical separation or retirement pay? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and today I'm going to walk you through the calculations to determine how much compensation somebody who's medically separated or retired gets. The last time we were talking about military medical separations and retirements, the so-called Chapter 61 retirements, we laid out a flowchart to determine the possible outcomes for a service member based on their time in service, their disability rating, and the nature of that disability, whether it's permanent or temporary. Plus, whether the service member is regular or reserve. That discussion got us to 6 Title X authorities that pay out compensation, sections 1201 to 1206. So today, let's look at how these compensations are actually calculated. Before we do that, let me vent a little. Chapter 61 is a difficult piece of U.S. code. If you get involved in this whole medical separation process and you find it complicated or confusing or mind-numbing, trust me, you are not alone. The more I work with this stuff, the more I'm starting to think that the person who wrote this code just loved overly complicated policy. I mean, we saw it when we built the flowchart just to get to these 6 authorities. Embrace yourself. We're going to see that same complicated mentality as we work through how to calculate the compensations. So with that in mind, I'm going to do as much as I can to just boil this down to the necessary pieces. To get started, even though there are 6 authorities, there are only really 3 outcomes: separation, temporary disability retired list, and retirement. And these 3 outcomes neck down even further into 2 sections of U.S. code for calculating compensation. Disability separation pay is covered in Section 1212, and retired pay is covered in Section 1401. I know it looks promising that things are going to get simpler, but like I said, brace yourself. Let's take a look first at disability severance pay. This calculation boils down to the service member's years of service times 2 times a monthly base pay rate. And that monthly base pay rate is determined by 2 factors: the date when a service member is separated and their rank. Now, just as an aside, you might remember that I said that Chapter 61 is full of what you might call safety nets. They're little pieces of U.S. code designed to prevent service members from accidental abuse. One example of this has to do with those years of service under Section 1208. I'm not going to get into the details now, but that section effectively makes sure that the service member gets credit for the highest number of years of service that could possibly be calculated under different retirement systems like the regular retirement or the non-regular retirement. Where the language of Section 1212 gets needlessly complicated is when it comes to the service member's rank. Essentially, the rank that gets used is the highest of either their current rank, any temporary rank they held, or the rank they would have been promoted to, either permanently or temporarily, if they had not been separated for a physical disability. It's fair to say that this separation pay, well, it's not a lot of money. Imagine an E4 who gets separated with 4 years of service in 2024. His monthly base pay would be just under $3,000. So 4 years times 2 times 3K, well, that's $24,000 before taxes. It is not exactly a fortune. Maybe, for our hypothetical E4, this is just a nice lump of change on their way out the door when they were going to be leaving the service anyways. But remember that the way that somebody gets into this situation where they're separated is that they have fewer than 20 years and they have a disability rating of 10% or 20% that makes them unfit for military service. My sense is that if you have, 10, 15 years of service under your belt already, you do not want a medical separation. All right, now let's take a look at Section 1401, Computation of Retired Pay. Now, I have to warn you, this is an unusual piece of U.S. code for a couple of reasons. For one thing, it uses a table to describe how to compute retired pay. Most U.S. code, like what we just saw, uses a mind-numbing amount of text. The second thing about this section is that it serves as the guidance for a whole host of situations that go well beyond disability retirements. Non-regular service, warrant officer, DOTMA retirement, and that's why there's so many formulas listed here. I'm not going to get into those other types of retirements now, but that also means that there is a lot of this section that we're going to be ignoring. Oh, and see how at first glance there are 5 formulas, but number 3 is missing? U.S. code is sometimes just a piece of work. Anyways, let's start with the calculation for retirement. And I'm skipping the temporary disability retired list for now, and you'll see why when we get to it. This calculation is very similar to the calculation that's used for a regular retirement. You have a retired pay base times a multiplier. For most folks, that retired pay base is just going to be the average of their high 36 months of base pay. And even though the law still accounts for service members who joined before 1980, I don't think any of them would fall into this situation because it would be a very special person who joined 45 years ago, is still in, and hasn't served 20 years. Anyways, that high 36 retired pay base gets multiplied by one of 2 values. Either the retired pay multiplier under Section 1409, that's the general formula, years of service times 2.5%, or if you're under the blended retirement system, it's years of service times 2%. Or the service member can elect a multiplier equal to the percentage of their disability not to exceed 75%. If you can imagine somebody with 19 years of service under the old system, they would have a multiplier of 47.5%. And so, if they have a disability rating of 50% or higher, naturally, they're going to go with the second option. Of course, if their disability rating is 80% or higher, they're going to be capped at 75%, but still, that's better than the general formula. If we look at the calculation for the temporary disability retired list, things look the same except for one extra rule. There is an additional amount added to the retired pay that increases the payment to 50% of the retired base pay. It's as if they use the general formula or the disability rating capped at 75% or 50%. And I don't know why it would be this way, or why the TDRL would have this, but the previous formula wouldn't include that little plus up. I just don't know. I'd love if you'd leave a comment that explained what that was all about. But anyways, that now gives us a sense of the compensation associated with the different medical separations and retirements. I already mentioned the video that lays out how you get to these different outcomes through the medical process. And if you're interested in the basic flow of the medical evaluation process, what's technically called the IDES process, watch this video.